Welcome to Optimize Your Endurance Riding with the Sweaty Equestrian. Personal trainer and endurance rider Tamara Basinger is here to help you ride stronger in a day and longer in your life.
Hey all, Tamara here with the Sweaty Equestrian. Today we're going to talk about how to get started in endurance riding if you're new to the sport. You know, endurance riding is an exciting sport that welcomes riders of all ages and equines of all breeds, but getting started can be daunting or intimidating. Fortunately, there are several good ways to learn the ropes, even if you don't have a horse. So we are going to talk about the three main ones that you'll hear recommended: volunteering, crewing, and catch riding. We'll cover best practices for each of those, and then we'll also talk about where to learn more and how you can start getting prepared to do some endurance riding of your own. Let's begin with volunteering. This is probably the most common recommendation to people who are brand new getting interested in the sport. It's recommended that you go out and volunteer at an endurance ride. In fact, endurance riding is a sport that runs on volunteers, and more hands are always welcome. Plus, there is no better way to see the inner workings of a ride than by spending your day at an actual ride helping out. Common roles that volunteers take on ride day include timing, pulsing, vet scribing, and being a Renaissance man or woman, helping out with all the different things. Let's take a look at each of those roles so you kind of have in your head what you might expect. The timer. The timer is responsible for noting when teams, horse and rider teams, come into the hold, when the horse pulses down, and when they're allowed to leave on their next loop. This was the job that I was given, along with some help, at the very first ride I ever went to, and I went to volunteer. Turns out that this can be a very busy, tricky role, so if you're the kind of person who tends to get flustered easily, this might not be the best place to start, but I'll tell you what. Timers have a front row seat to watch how the horses and riders are performing, and there's always someone willing to show you how it's done, and there's generally a group of old-timers hanging around at the timing table because it's such a good place to watch everything that's going on, and you'll generally have time to swap stories with them during rushes of horses and riders coming in, so it's a really good place to just learn. Another role is pulsing. The pulsers are responsible for checking the heart rates of the horses as they come into the hold. So obviously, if you're going to be a pulser, you'll want to be familiar with the use of a stethoscope, you'll need to wear a watch with a second hand, and you'll need to know how to calculate an equine heart rate based on a 10-second listen. So if you are familiar with those things or are comfortable learning them, this is a role that'll put you up close with the horses and riders all day long. How about vet scribing? This is one of my favorites. The vet scribes jot down the scores that are called out by the veterinarians as they check over each horse for soundness and certain metabolic parameters. So it'll give you a fascinating window into the nuances of the sport and the care that is taken to keep these horses safe. And then finally, let's talk about being the Renaissance man or woman. If you don't feel ready for a more official role, there is always a need for folks who can help with miscellaneous tasks. This could range from helping fill water tanks or fetch hay to preparing dinner for the riders or lunch for the volunteers, or simply holding horses while their riders run to the porta potty. So now let's talk about best practices for volunteering. If you want to give this a try, what should you bear in mind? First of all, it's a good idea to give a heads up to the ride manager ahead of the ride, days or weeks ahead, so that they know you're coming. And advise them regarding any limitations that you might have and your level of experience roles that you might be interested in. All that helps the ride manager plan for how they're going to place volunteers and make the ride run smoothly. And by the way, if your level of experience is 0, that is okay. Just let the ride manager know that. They might assign you to something like holding a gate that needs to be watched so cattle don't come through, but so the riders don't have to get off and back on to open that gate. It doesn't take any particular skill, but I'll tell you what, that role is extremely well appreciated by riders and the ride manager. Also, another best practice here, show up as promised. If something comes up and you can't make it, try your best to let the ride manager know in advance so that you don't mess up their planning by not showing up when you said you would. Also, bring some snacks and drinking water. Typically, ride managers will feed lunch to the volunteers. There will usually be snacks and drinking water around, but just in case, bring something so that you have it if you need it. Also, if you bring dogs or kids, make sure that you keep them under control. This is a safety thing for everybody. Most rides have some rules about keeping dogs on leashes. And generally speaking, if you're going to be helping out in the vetting or timing area, best not to have your dog there, and definitely not safe to let kids be running around in the crowd of horses. So just bear in mind how you're going to handle that ahead of time. Also, another best practice is to make sure you're listening to the riders. They know their horses best, and so if they ask you not to feed a horse something in particular or to wait on the pulse, try to follow those instructions respectfully. Now, you will occasionally run into a grumpy rider. They may be dehydrated, hot, worried, anxious. Whatever it is, it's probably not you, so try not to take bad moods personally. Riders, on the whole, try not to be in a bad mood, and same for the volunteers. But let's face it, we're all human. It does happen, so just be ready to have a thick skin if you need to. Also, if you have lots of questions, great. Ask your questions. Generally speaking, the people around you at the ride, the other volunteers and the vets, will be happy to chat. But wait for quiet moments to ask those questions, because if somebody is busy concentrating on something else, you don't want to be annoying or distracting. And finally, if you are able, stick around after the ride, stay for the awards so that you can join in the general conversation around camp and celebrate the rider's success. It can be a good and interesting time in the evening after the ride is over. Next, let's talk about crewing. This is different from volunteering because you are going to be crewing for a particular rider or maybe a couple riders, as opposed to generally volunteering to make the ride run as a whole. Now, it's perfectly possible to ride endurance without crew. I did that for many, many years. But a lot of riders enjoy the luxury of having a dedicated individual or team to assist them. So if you know an endurance rider, you can always ask if they would like you to crew them at their next event. Just don't be offended if they say no, because sometimes as a rider, it is easier just to manage the horse yourself than to manage a person in addition to the horse. So that's just a matter of preference. Crew members are going to see the most action when their riders are in camp, of course. What they do is things like making sure that both horse and rider have everything they need to recover, reset, prepare for the next loop. And depending on the tasks your rider assigns, you might be filling water bottles, preparing snacks, soaking mashes for the horse, maybe swapping hoof boots, sponging sweat, sponging the horse with cool water, swiping sunscreen on your rider, finding lost ride cards, or checking the ribbon color that your rider needs to follow next. Crewing gives you an intimate look at the inside of an endurance ride, including the trials and triumphs of your rider. And as a bonus, you'll have plenty of time to shoot the breeze with other crew and volunteers while your rider is out on the trail. So let's look at best practices for crewing. One thing to be sure to do is ask your rider ahead of time what they would like you to be prepared to do for them. And then, of course, try to follow those instructions very carefully. Because your rider is going to be out for anywhere from 8 to 20 or more miles at a time, obviously, you're going to have a lot of downtime in between. So this is kind of a hurry up and wait sort of game for the crew. You might be hustling out to a vet check that's away from camp, taking your rider's stuff that they need out there. And then you might sit there and chat with people for an hour or two while your rider's on the trail. And then you'll help them. And then they'll be back out on the trail again. And you'll be driving back to camp where you will wait for them for their next check. Things like that. So be prepared to hurry up and wait. That's just the nature of the beast. Also, again, like with volunteering, don't take bad moods personally. Hopefully, you'll be working with a rider who isn't going to take a bad mood out on you. But again, endurance riding can be stressful on the body and mind and emotions. So try not to take it personally if you do get snapped at. Also, don't feel useless if it seems like there actually isn't all that much to do. Sometimes all your rider really needs is a friendly smile, a kind word, and someone to hold their horse while they take care of other things. And that doesn't feel like a lot, but it actually is. Next, let's talk about catch riding. Catch riding is when you compete on somebody else's horse. Many riders try to keep multiple horses fit for endurance distances, but obviously they can only ride one at a time. And this may mean that they need someone like you to ride their other horse. Being invited to catch ride is an honor. The horse's owner is entrusting you with his or her precious partner, not to mention all the resources that have been poured into getting that horse ready for an endurance ride. So it's critical that if you're going to catch ride, you be a strong, balanced, thoughtful rider and follow the owner's instructions precisely. Of course, you're also going to want to keep yourself safe by accepting catch rides only on horses that you're comfortable handling in the charged race environment. By taking excellent care of someone else's horse, you increase your likelihood of becoming a recommended catch rider who is in high demand. So let's take a look at some best practices for catch riding. First of all, how do you find a catch ride? Mostly these are going to be personal connections. It's going to be relationship based. So talk to riders that you already know to see if they or someone they know has a horse that they need to have ridden in endurance rides. So ask your local riders. Also, the local or regional riding clubs can sometimes connect horseless riders and riderless horses. And then, of course, there's social media. Now, since you are asking to be entrusted with somebody's horse, it's a good idea to get recommendations regarding your horsemanship skill, your riding skill, and hopefully you'll be able to add some endurance experience to that resume soon as well. When you catch ride, you will very often ride with the owner, but sometimes you will ride the horse on your own or with a different group of riders. Either way, if you're catch riding, be sure to follow the owner's instructions to the letter and always err on the side of caution. Also, plan to pay your own entry fee. It's typical for a catch rider to pay at least the entry fee. And also think about contributing to other costs. You will come to an agreement with the owner in each individual scenario, but bear in mind that it can cost hundreds of dollars beyond the actual entry fee for the owner to bring a horse to a ride. These substantial costs include things like fuel to get to the ride, electrolytes that the horse is given during the ride, hoof protection to prepare him for the ride, ulcer guard. It really adds up fast, so the more you can contribute, the better. Also, plan to help with the work. This is also substantial. It takes a lot more effort to manage and care for 2 or more horses in camp than just one. So don't just show up and ride. Be available to help tack up if wanted. Sometimes the owner will want to tack up their own horse, so they do it exactly the usual way. But you can also help clean up horses and tack after the ride, hand walk the horses to keep them loose, fill water buckets, set up and break down camp, prepare meals for riders and any crew that you might have. There's a lot of work to be done, so make sure that you are offering to help do it. And finally, don't be a flake. Treat catch riding like the honor that it is. Show up on time, every time, communicate, and have a good attitude. Your reputation, whether good or bad, will precede you. Endurance is a small world, so go out of your way to make sure that reputation is good.
Optimize Your Endurance Riding is sponsored by Essential Endurance Rider Fitness, the only personal fitness program designed by an endurance rider for endurance riders. If you're ready to ride more and hurt less, check it out at thesweatyequestrian.com/fitness.
Now let's talk about some ways that you can get started with endurance riding when you can't be at an actual ride. My favorite way is to be a voracious learner. There is a handful of comprehensive books about endurance riding, and my favorites are included in a blog post that I have at thesweatyequestrian.com. If you search for top 5 books, you will find it. Now, I should warn you that most of the books on endurance riding appear to be outdated because they are quite a few years old. The good news is that nearly all of the information they contain is still accurate, so don't let those dated photos scare you off. It's still a really good place to start because they give you a thorough picture of the spectrum of information that you need to know about endurance riding. Once you have that baseline comprehensive knowledge that you can get from a good book, you can also go out and look for articles and websites that provide information. The American Endurance Ride Conference, or AERC, publishes a monthly magazine called Endurance News, and most people who endurance ride in the United States will have copies of Endurance News laying around that they might be willing to share with you, or you can subscribe to it directly through AERC. There are some websites that have articles available, including the AERC website. EDRA, the Endurance Distance Riding Association website, has some articles on it. Also check out the Southeastern Distance Riders Association and Old Dominion Equestrian Endurance Organization websites. They tend to have the most articles, but also see if there's an organization specific to your region and check that out as well. Of course, subscribe to this podcast so that you know when new episodes come out, and search your favorite podcatcher for other endurance riding podcasts. There are a few other ones out there. Now, what about social media? Social media, primarily Facebook, does offer many groups and pages about endurance riding, and these are really useful for getting to know the community and hearing a range of perspectives on endurance-related topics. My advice, though, is that you should go ahead and listen in on those discussions, but don't try to use them in place of more comprehensive resources. Come to social media with all the usual cautions. Those short blurbs that people post often miss the larger context, or they ignore or overemphasize certain nuances. So again, just don't be lazy and let this be your primary source of information. Do the work of reading a book and absorbing articles from reliable sources. Speaking of articles, I have quite a lot of them at thesweatyequestrian.com, so check that out. And while you're there, be sure you subscribe to the newsletter because I do send out a variety of free resources from articles to even video mini courses that only our subscribers know about. You'll also get a heads up in your email when new content releases. If you go to thesweatyequestrian.com, just find the Start Here page and you can subscribe to the newsletter. As you learn more and more about endurance riding, if it continues to be attractive to you, you're going to naturally start evaluating how to prepare. What do you need in order to endurance ride, and what do you already have? Obviously, one of the first things that will come to mind is the horse. If you don't happen to have an Arabian or a breed that is most commonly seen in endurance, don't let that discourage you. A lot of people ride non-Arab breeds, and you can always start with what you have. As long as your horse is sound, healthy, and adequately trained for trail riding, you can definitely get started. Almost any breed can do at least a slow limited distance ride, that's about 25 miles, and help you get started in the sport. Also, tack. Start with what's already working for you and your horse. You don't have to go out and buy a bunch of endurance-specific tack. As long as what you have fits you and the horse well, everything else is optional in the beginning. Other things that you're going to need include a truck and trailer. Now, you might be able to share this with somebody, but obviously you're going to have to get your horse to rides at the very least, and you'll probably have to do some hauling out to condition as well. Also, you're going to need camping gear for the horse and the human in ride camps, so that's something to start thinking about. If you're a total nerd like me and you want to look at everything that I pack to go to an endurance ride, I do have a free endurance ride packing list that you can download from thesweatyequestrian.com/packing list. Last but unfortunately not least, let's talk about money. Endurance riding is not the most expensive equestrian sport by any means, but neither is it cheap. You're going to need to think about paying for fuel to travel to rides and also for conditioning, entry fees, extra horse care like nutrition and hoof protection. If you're crossing state lines, you'll need a Coggins and health certificate. So just start planning in the back of your mind for the expenses involved with the sport. All that said, though, don't stress too much early on. We will talk in future episodes about creative ways to pull together resources so that you can ride even on a relative shoestring. In the meantime, if you have a horse in mind, you can start in on his endurance-specific training and conditioning. What does that look like? Be sure you're subscribed to this podcast and tune in for the next episode because that's what we're going to talk about. So get ready. We're going to optimize your endurance riding.
Hey, if you want to get more sweaty, visit the blog at thesweatyequestrian.com. You can follow The Sweaty Equestrian on Facebook or find @SweatyEquestrian on Instagram. And remember, you have what it takes to be a full athletic partner for your horse. Saddle up strong.